Okay, so we left off here, the video just ended. So anyways, so I'll just repeat that again. So remember that when the ligand is bound to the receptor has a very high affinity for the G protein. Okay, but the conformational changes, so there has to be some conformational change that is allowing this G protein to come close to the GPCR. The same conformational changes that happen also allow the GPCR to have an affinity for GRK, which is a kinase. Okay, this GRK is a kinase. That means it can phosphorylate things. Okay, so when the GRK is active, it can phosphorylate its substrate. So the receptor basically becomes a substrate for GRK enzyme, which is a kinase enzyme, and it phosphorylates. A kinase always phosphorylates. Okay, so it phosphorylates this receptor. Now when there are phosphates group on the receptor, or in other words, when the receptor is phosphorylated, this will not, now this new form of the receptor will not have any affinity for the G protein. So I think it makes sense to say that these things, the GRK is phosphorylating, has already phosphorylated the receptor before even the G protein has done its function and come back here. Because if it hasn't by that point, then the G protein will go back to this thing again. The GDP will be converted to GTP and so on. So we don't want the whole thing to go over again, because we want to stop the signal and to reset the signal at some point, right? So it has now phosphorylated. Since it is now phosphorylated, no affinity for the G protein. The G protein just hangs in there in its inactive state, and this phosphorylated state allows for another protein called arrestin to bind to the GPCR. Because the arrestin is bound to the GPCR, it does not allow for the G protein to bind to it. Okay? So this process is referred to as the desensitization, and let me just read this off. The cytoplasmic domain of the activated receptor GPCR is phosphorylated by a specific type of kinase called the G protein coupled receptor kinase. So that is what the GRK stands for, GRK. The conformational changes that make it possible for GPCRs to activate G proteins also make them good GRK substrates. Thus, after ligand binding, GPCRs become sensitive to GRK phosphorylation. GPCR phosphorylation sets the stage for the second step, which is the binding of proteins called arrestins. Arrestins form a small group of proteins that bind GPCRs and compete for binding with heterotrimeric G proteins. This arrestin binding prevents further activation of additional G proteins. So that's the whole G protein coupled receptor mechanism. Now, just a few things that I should have mentioned in the beginning, but I forgot. Who discovered G protein coupled receptors? Martin Rodbell. Okay, he discovered them, so obviously he deserves the credit for it. So his name is Martin Rodbell, and they were discovered in the 1970s, so not too many years ago. The other thing is we know this already. We know that these G protein coupled receptors have 3 subunits, so we just have to give a name to it. So because there's 3 subunits, alpha, beta, and gamma, right? They are heterotrimeric. That means trimeric refers to the fact that they have 3 subunits, and hetero refers to the fact that they're all different. So different 3 subunits. And there's another group of proteins that are G proteins as well, and they are called the RAS G proteins. Now the distinction between the RAS proteins and one of the distinctions between the RAS proteins and the G proteins is that RAS proteins are monomeric. So they only have 1 subunit, and so there's no question of heterotrimeric or homotrimeric, okay? And the GDP-GTP story. So this particular site is referred to as, let me just thicken it a little bit. This is referred to as the guanine binding site, guanine nucleotide binding site. These are just the words that we should be aware of. So the video is going to end, and we'll start off in the next video. Alright, see you guys there.